Six, right?
Yes.
Let's rock and roll. I'm Stephen Pitts, aka the old retiree. Chicagoan, Boston, Houston, long time here, 21 years, I guess. Retired from Labor Center 3 years ago. I'm happy to kind of moderate the panel of new and old friends. And the idea is kind of to reflect on the experiences of kind of doing the left organizing in the 70s and 80s and go forward. And I hope that we can have a good kind of back and forth session. I hope that we can simply kind of grow from the process. And I thought that the growth comes from the exchange, or the jargon says the growth comes from the struggle, the interaction. And I hate the idea we simply talk at people, because if that's a matter of simply sharing a war story, if we go to a bar and tell lies about what we did and didn't do. The idea is to share some experiences, have some conversations, and then see what you want to hear about and learn about. Because the idea is not for us, it's for you as a whole. And so I'm that introduction. Simply it's Peter, Warren, and John. We have a book, a memoir, and a book. A memoir coming, by the way, and a book. But why don't you first say a bit about yourselves, just to be 1 minute intro, who you are. You know, I'll get things going beyond that, okay? 1 minute, who are you?
Peter Olney, retired as the organizing director of the International Longshore and Warehouse Union, where I was for about 20 years. Had long experience of organizing, particularly in California among immigrant workers. Worked in the garment sector, furniture sector, and worked for Justice for Janitors in Los Angeles before. We launched a project in LA called the Los Angeles Manufacturing Action Project, which was an attempt to organize industrial, mostly Latino workers in the Alameda Industrial Corridor of Los Angeles. After that project folded, I took the job with the ILW and had some great experiences organizing in that great union. So we'll reflect a little more on that as we go on.
Who are you, Warren?
Hi, so I'm Warren Marr. I'm the only guy here that doesn't have a book, but I have an article, and it's free, so it's the cheapest thing in here. I actually came out of the Hotel Restaurant Workers Union. That's what I wrote about, that's what I talked about, but actually I was in a lot of unions. Before I went into HERE, I was a Teamster, I was a Realtor clerk. I mean, I worked all through high school, junior high school, and as soon as I got out of high school, my trajectory was get the best freaking job you could get in San Francisco, because I was not college bound or at that time or anything like that. So anyway, but I ended up in HERE, which I could talk a little bit about, because I wanted to organize Chinese workers, immigrants, and specifically. And luckily for me, even though I hated it at that time, because my parents were immigrants, I happened to be speak fluent Chinese. And so some of my other comrades, other leftists, were already in the union, already trying to organize. The problem is they didn't speak Chinese, so that's not gonna work. So anyway, that's how I got in there. I decided to give up my Teamster job, which I fought like hell, because that was a good freaking job. And I went into HERE, which I could talk a little bit more about later. And I met this guy I knew before, but we were both on a DSA, for those of you guys in DSA, podcast one time, nationwide. And we were on a panel talking about our labor work in the 70s. And then at the end of the panel, of course, we couldn't see anybody. I said, those of us that were on the panel said, hey, who are you? Where do you live? He says he lives in Sebastopol. And I said, I live in Sebastopol, which is a town of 7,000. Neither of us really live in town. We live in Eggland, literally across the road from each other. But we didn't know each other. So then we started having lunch and talking to each other. So we had some very similar experiences, although he was in auto and I was in HRE, but around the same time. So that's it for me now.
I want to come down. Who are you?
Yeah, I became an activist in about 1985 with the murder of Schwerner, Cheney, and Goodwin, three SNCC or civil rights workers organizing voter registration, and they were arrested by the police and then dumped in given to the Klan, and the Klan took them and murdered them and left them in a marsh. And it really struck a chord that they were just a little bit older than I was. And so I became very active, in the civil rights movement. I was in SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and the fight against the Vietnam War, trying to shut down the induction center in Manchester, New Hampshire. I went on to college at Madison, Wisconsin, which was to the epicenter of student uprising, and literally spent 3.5 years in open rebellion. People have so forgotten that existed, that we were literally on strike, half of the time that we were there. And when SDS broke up, I became part of the Revolutionary Youth Movement too, which was one of the organizations that came out of SDS. And we had two fundamental principles. One was that when we graduated, we'd go into the Army to organize against the Vietnam War, or into the factory to organize, because we believed that workers have the power as a class to fundamentally transform this society. So I went into auto, where I worked for 13 years when I wasn't fired, which happened fairly regularly. And we organized a caucus that we can talk about later, and we're sued for $2.2 million for defamation for slandering racist, bigoted foremen in our newsletter.
So let me throw the structure today. I want to see if we can talk around maybe 4 basic ideas. One is simply why you did what you did. Second is, what are some of the experiences that are ones you can say publicly, by the way, not get thrown in jail? You talk about them.
Statute of limitation is run.
Okay. Yeah. Well, that case. Also, thirdly, what are some of the lessons learned from that experience? And then lastly, how you apply it to today. Some thoughts for today. Now, clearly, you can go deep if you're watching, no problem at all. You may have more thoughts in the audience you want to talk about as well. So the structure would be kind of, each you take 5 to 7 minutes on those kind of why you think we did, and kind of greatest hits of the experiences. Then we can have some short discussion among ourselves, kind of conversation, kind of fistbowl in the lingo. And then over to you for questions on a number of topics. You would bombard them, or throw apples or bananas, or your choice. And then lastly, we have a summation. What do you think about going forward given this whole conversation? Does it work well? Does it work well? So, Peter, 5 to 7 minutes on what did you do? Why?
So I grew up in suburban Massachusetts, and my politics come from my grandmother. My grandmother was a woman from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, raised a Presbyterian, moves to Malden, Massachusetts with her husband, and she wants Sunday school for her children. So she goes to the Presbyterians, there's no room. Then she goes to the Universalist church, and there was room. So her kids become part of the Sunday school at the Universalist church. She becomes a leader in the Women's Federation, eventually the head of the Universalist Women's Federation. And then when the Unitarians and Universalists merge in 1963, she's the first national secretary of the Unitarian Universalists. And so that church obviously had a role in in the freedom struggle in the South and also a role in the anti-war movement. So I was raised with those politics. I didn't really know what a union was. I probably didn't know any workers, given my class background. But I went to Italy for a year to study, and the whole year, this is 1971, 72, the whole year they were on strike. So I ended up playing on an Italian rugby team and marching in political protests in Italy. And I'll never forget an anti-war protest in Rome where there were 100,000 workers wearing three-piece suits and red carnations carrying their union banners protesting against the war in Vietnam. And I thought, wow, I'm not in Boston anymore. And so when I came home, I abandoned college and went to work in a machine shop in Roxbury, Massachusetts, where we organized that machine shop into the United Electrical Workers. That was 1973 through 75, and from that point forward, I worked in as an industrial soldier, organizing in factories and hospitals, bringing in a union, politicizing the existing union. So those are my origins. The civil rights movement, the anti-war movement imbued me with certain politics, and then the Italian experience really took me to another level.
So Warren, how about you? Why'd you do what you did, man?
I was kind of forced into it, but really, I was already a leftist by the time I went into HERE, because like I said, I was asked to go in because I spoke Chinese and they needed me to do that. But I wanted to back up a little bit because in a way, I'm very proud of this fact, even though it has some downsides. I actually came out of the working class. I didn't go into college, never participated in SDS or any of that stuff, even though I'm in that generation. So I'm just a street kid. I was born and raised in San Francisco. I was raised in Chinatown. Both of my parents were garment workers. And the only thing that made our family a little unique is I had 9 brothers and sisters, which meant that we were fucking crowded together on top of my mother's sewing factory in a 2-3 bedroom flat. I wanted to get the hell out of the house as soon as possible. So I always worked. You know, all my brothers and sisters worked. Like a lot of immigrants, we worked. We worked in restaurants. We worked, which is why I didn't want to go into HERE because I hated restaurant work, even though that was very appropriate for my gender and my race. And I tell people I went into HERE because of my gender and my race, because I came from another workshop where the question came up whether there was such a thing as a white working class or not. And my attitude is, well, they belong to the unions. I wouldn't let me in. So that was one of the things that was different. And also the other thing that was different is I grew up in San Francisco during the 50s and the 60s, which made me old as hell. But it was during a time when, you know, people think segregation was only in Mississippi, but shit. From K to 12, I never went to a San Francisco public school that was not majority Chinese, which was very cool for me because I felt that was better than being integrated because we were fighting with everybody. You walk out of the certain block, you were fighting with somebody. I was one of the first families that invaded Hooley's neighborhood. Where is she? My Italiano sister, yep. We took over North Beach. Thank you very much. We got them and they left. And I told, every time I see her in front of Cafe Trieste, which is where I grew up, there, I said, get the hell out of the neighborhood because we took it over fair and square. But that's the environment I grew up with. Now, how I became political is because in 1966, which you all know, the Black Panthers formed in Oakland, and in San Francisco, Chinatown, there was this kind of copycat group that formed called the Red Guard Party in 67. And so they were formed out of a pool hall, and I hung around a lot of pool halls, but this was one that I went into. And they were, so Bobby Seale and some of the Panthers would come in and hold court in the back of the pool hall when we would go in. I had did not want nothing to do with those guys. All I wanted to do was smoke weed, shoot pool, and have a good time. But what happened to me was I also got arrested when I was 13, and one of the Red Guards found me in school and said, would you like representation in blah, 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 juvenile court? And of course, what the fuck am I gonna say? No, thank you. No, so the Red Guards luckily represented me in juvie. And in those days, all you needed was an adult to represent you, because, parents didn't speak English and everything was in English. So, they got me off, whatever it was that I did. And they kept working on me, but really I wanted nothing to do with them. But I was a beneficiary of some of the earliest reforms, like summer youth jobs. So I was always in the summer youth program. And there was one program in particular, which I wrote a little bit about, but it's not together yet. It was made up of this group of 40 guys. Actually, it was 4 groups of 10s. Me and my brother, who's no longer with us, was also in that group. We called ourselves Team 40. And the reason they formed us, and they were led by radicals from San Francisco State, because remember 68, the strike just happened. They came into Chinatown, they started working with some of us kids. The reason they worked with us is we were the 40 guys, it was all guys, that we couldn't get jobs, because we all had records. Remember what happened when I was 13? So, therefore what happened is we started the first public works projects, believe it or not, in Chinatown. So like my brother, he built one of the first mini parks, which is very in vogue now, I think, in San Francisco. In Chinatown, I forgot what I did. I think I painted the rec center. I did some other shit too. I can't remember everything I did. But these were projects that college students supervised us doing. So they also hung out with us, because most of them were from the suburbs, so they got to hang out with us at our pool halls, and they got to hang out with us. And then some of us, honestly, we started hanging out with them after work on weekends, Fridays. We would go to one of their houses and smoke weed and drink wine, and they would try to convert us to what was, whatever political. But it didn't happen with me for a long time, honestly. So finally, I was in my early 20s and I was already a worker. I was a teamster. I was at a phone company. I was in and out of a lot of different jobs, some union, some non-union. And what happened was the shit really hit the fan in Chinatown. If you guys are into the lore of the 70s, is when all the gang shit started happening in the community. So a lot of the guys I was hanging out with, they didn't go the right way and they started killing each other, literally. We were in the same group, we started killing each other. So what happened is I kind of checked out. I kind of checked out of my street and lumpen ways, which was a good thing. And then the leftists who were still kind of buzzing around me, they started making sense all of a sudden. So I met some of them at the phone company. I had a job there, and I met some of them in community work. I came back into Chinatown. Actually, I did some housing work for a while. You guys remember the iHotel stuff? I was in and out of the SROs, because I grew up there anyway. I used to be the paper boy of the iHotel. So I knew my way around. I knew how to speak Chinese, kind of important at that time. So they really worked on me because they wanted to recruit me, which was fine. And I did end up joining Iwo Kern, which is not the Red Guards. They actually started in Chinatown, and they were a Pantherist type organization too, not socialist, not Marxist, Leninist, more revolutionary nationalist, like the Panthers. But they came west. And by the time the they came, the Red Guards were dying, which is controversial because some members would say, no, we never died. We just merged. But to me, they were gone. So, but they picked up the remnants, so we became one, New York and San Francisco. That's the group I ended up joining. And then I joined before they became Marxist-Leninists, but then like other nationalists, as time went on, we converted to Marxism-Leninism.
So let me pause you for a
Yep,
second.
that's it. Sorry.
So,
Thank you.
that was
I'll leave it
Supreme
at
John
that.
Coltrane saying pause.
Yep.
Okay.
Thank
We'll
you.
come back to that.
Yep.
Lots to talk about.
So
John,
that's
you
how I
doing?
got it.
Yeah, I
What
thought
got you started?
the easiest way for me to get into why I did what I did is a passage from the book. It's very short. On the night of December 4th, Chicago police, in league with the FBI, assassinated the charismatic Illinois chairman of the Black Panther Party, 21-year-old Fred Hampton. Fred was riddled with bullets as he lay drugged surreptitiously by a police agent, unconscious in his bed. The uniformed hitmen grinned as they dispatched his lifeless body. Many who heard Fred's speeches, this is in Madison, Wisconsin, including me, departed the hall feeling transformed. If one attended his speech questioning the system, one came out indicting the system. While speaking in his rapid, rhythmic, staccato style, Fred locked eyes with each of us, issuing what felt every bit a personal challenge. Looking back, I can safely say that the short life and premature death of Fred Hampton turned thousands of 1969 radicals into 1970 revolutionaries. So we were very close to the Panther Party. In fact, after they had killed Chairman Fred and the Deputy Minister of Defense came up to speak from Illinois, I was assigned to do security. And so I went to pick them up with a sawed-off shotgun in the trunk of the car at the airport, and they got out of the deputy defense minister and two other Panthers, and they loaded up their pistols. Because in those days, you could carry a gun and bullets if they weren't in the same bag. So, we got to the university, and here we went in a side door, and I ended up standing up on stage with a shotgun on my hip, sort of posing like I was a Panther, and thinking to myself, I'm going to be kicked out of this school tomorrow. You can't do this. But they didn't kick me out, and the relationship with the Panthers deepened. I became in charge of selling the Panther Party paper on the campus, organizing a group of us, and we used to sell 350 papers every week. In 1971, I made the transition to leave and go to work, and I was hired into an automotive assembly plant, American Motors, which there's a few people of my age that'll know what that was. But right away, I didn't realize I had hired in to the most militant factory in the United States at that time, literally. We had the right to strike over every grievance. We had voluntary overtime, and we had one steward for every 35 employees. And you only had to work on your job a half hour a day. And we were paid by the corporation. So we had an army of 350 stewards that were policing the contract on the floor of the shop at all times. After I got off probation, I didn't get my morning break. And the guys were yelling, Melrod, are you chicken shit? You a company man? Take your break. And I'm like, wow. To be a radical, you got to be radical. So I guess I better just take my break. So I threw the taillights in the car and I went and sat in the cafeteria, and the foreman came running down the line, face red, white shirt all sweaty. And he said, Melrod, you're fired. Get your stuff and leave. Then a blue button steward came up behind him and showed him the contract where I had a right to a break. And he said, Melrod, go back on your job. The steward said it. And I said, that's what I'm going to be. I'm going to be a blue button steward. And of course, that's where I started. And I know my time's running short. I worked my way from steward to chief steward to department head to international delegate to the convention to the Renault World Council, because Renault bought American Motors, and finally to the bargaining committee. and can say that we unfortunately bargained the only concessionary contract that had ever been forced on the local, because Renault had literally made plans to shut the plant, and we were able to keep it open for a while and guarantee the pensions of everyone, and everyone had the right to transfer later into Chrysler and get their 30 years in. So there's a lot more along these lines, but that's about 7 minutes.
Well, actually, it's 6 minutes. It's good enough.
But I timed myself because I knew I'd go too long.
My time is slow. Don't worry about it. Okay.
All right.
I'm going to go further than some stuff. Ask you, all three of you, what were some of the experience that shaped you on the job? So you started becoming a radical socialist communist. You label yourself, right, on the job, doing some organizing. What were some of the experiences that shaped your consciousness as you're trying to build power amongst workers? Peter?
Well, I was a pretty naive kid when I started organizing. The first factory that we organized was a machine shop in Roxbury, Massachusetts, where we were running giant punch presses. And
What's
I
punch
remember,
What's punch press?
stamping metal. And we were making burrs and shims and washers for plumbing, basically. And I would run this machine. And so I remember that we negotiated a very good first contract with the United Electrical Workers, a wonderful union that many of you are aware of, particularly their stand around Palestine. I think they were the first union to come out and call for a ceasefire. Anyways, that was the union. And so I remember as a kid with no experience, no training, and no mentoring, I decided to do some theoretical work and to analyze unions in America. And I'll never forget writing a paper, and I got to try to dig it up somewhere, where I claimed that unions were an arm of the state apparatus.
Sorry.
You laugh. You all should laugh.
It's true.
Nightmares of my past. Don't worry about it. Okay?
So you can see the sort of naivete, reading some Marx, reading some Lenin, trying to piece all of this together, so I got slapped several times by reality. And I really had to learn through hard knocks that, you had to do a concrete analysis of concrete conditions and really understand where things were at. So I'll also remember in the same factory, we read in a study group that Lenin said that the working class should defend all other classes. That was an evening study group. So the next day I go to work and the company fires a supervisor. And he was a popular supervisor. Nevertheless, I organized a walkout and shut down the whole factory over the boss being fired. And I'll never forget calling the union hall, the United Electrical Workers, and my representative was Michael Eisenhower, somebody many of you know.
Yeah.
And I said, Michael, he says, what are you doing? And of course, in those days, it wasn't a cell phone. I had to go outside to a payphone on the street. I said, well, we're on strike because they fired the boss. And he goes, what the F? Get back to work. So that's how I started. I was a naive young kid, but I learned over time that, this issue of concrete analysis, concrete conditions, figuring out where workers are at and moving with them and building struggle with them was the way to fly, not coming at things with these ideological precepts, which is kind of the way I began.
Warren, what were some formative experiences for you that helped shape you as you're becoming radical organizing workers?
Well, I think I told people once that I started out as a reformist because that's who was helping me with all the summer youth jobs and all that. And I thought, I want to be a reformist, work for the mayor's office and help people out, be a social worker or something like that. And then I became a nationalist because that was my natural inclination because of the separation. And just to be clear, even when I was in multinational jobs, it was very segregated. And even local too was very segregated by what jobs you could have. And even somebody else in a previous workshop I just came out of said, even the post office, I used to work at the post office a lot. going to the dining hall, white guys, maybe some with black, Filipinos and Chinese, we're always by ourselves. Part of it is language, part of it is what you're doing during your break, part of it is just that's the way it is. And so that's where I came out of. I spent a lot of time fighting with unions too. But I also learned a lot from the workers. And that's, to me, that was the best thing about going in. I didn't go in as a staff person of a union that I never worked for. I went in as a worker, and I'm very proud of that too, because the workers will tell you, this is how it is here, this is how you survive. And sometimes when I got into the hotel restaurant work, because there's so many immigrants, a lot of Chinese workers would say, what the fuck are you doing here? You were born here, you speak English, what the fuck are you, which is why I don't want to go in. What the fuck am I doing there? I'm here to organize you because that's the party line. But you know, that's, you can't say that. But I also learned a great respect from the workers because there was different standards for different workers. So like when John talked about union person, you're supposed to go on breaks. And one of the first places I worked in, none of the Chinese would go on break. The white guys would all go on breaks, but none of the Chinese would go on break. And I learned that I would not go on a break until I took everybody with me. And I ended up doing it. So it forced me to organize where they were at. It forced me to say, I'm working like a Chinaman. I can work as fucking good as you guys. And that's what those guys used to tell me. I know I'm not supposed to use those pejoratives, but this is what it is. The Chinese worker says, you know what, Warren, what we lack with our mobs, because all white guys can all talk shit and stuff, we have to make up for our hands. So I was one of the better workers ever. I became one of the best cooks at the Hyatt. I became one of the best cooks everywhere I went, because that protected me from management, but that also won over the immigrants. Because when I said, I'm tired, it's time for us to take a break, everybody said, yeah, fucking right, we're all tired. We're all ready to take a break. So I did not go on breaks by myself. And when I fought something, it was with everybody else was saying, you guys want to fight this shit? Okay, let's go fight this shit. That's what I learned from them. So I had to work like them, not my standard of what I thought that I could do. I had to work as good as them and better than them. And that's how I learned how to be an organizer. And I got elected into office because of that. Not just because I'm a union guy, I'm pro-union, or they like all my leftist politics, because they knew I could represent them. It wasn't, just what I thought they should be doing.
So John, what experience was shaped you?
Yeah, I entered into the factory on a little different methodology. I came in full bore. You know, I was in front of the factory on the third month selling the Milwaukee Worker, which was the paper of the Revolutionary Union, a Maoist organization. So from the third month on, I was being red-baited and defending myself and organizing at the same time, because it was very clear that what people cared about was the day-to-day struggle. And they announced that they were speeding up the assembly line by 3 cars an hour, which might not sound like a lot, but when you're on an assembly line, that's a lot of speed up. And a group of young guys got together, a lot of Vietnam vets, a lot of vets of color, a lot of Black women who were young church women who had a sense of organization and community. And we formed this caucus. And we said, let's fight this speed up. And we got together and we wrote up a flyer, which in those days you had to put on the mimeograph machine and hand crank out your flyer. And we handed that out. And it said, fight speed up, walk, don't run. Unfortunately, it had a line in it that said, Hitler wasn't this bad. I tried to get that out, but democracy prevailed, and I decided I better be on the literature writing committee from then on. But in any event, the senior workers, all of a sudden came to life. They taught us how to ride the line, which meant that you did your job to the exact specifications. you kept working until you finished your job, which pushed the next person out of their job and then the person further down out of their work area. So we were producing nothing but junk cars that had to be repaired. And that's when the word came out that the president of the union was out to get rid of me. I was a communist. I was in with the Black Panther Party, and on and on. Now, interestingly enough, we sort of upped the ante. We went to my house, and this is before you could go get a t-shirt printed, and we learned how to silk screen these t-shirts that said, big stop sign, said fight Speeda. And we brought in 25, and people started wearing the first 25. So we went back that night, and we did a couple hundred, and we sold them the next day. Then the company notified everyone that they would fire anyone wearing in the t-shirt the next day. So I got nervous. I mean, here, I'm a pretty young kid. I'm 21 at that point, and these people are, risking their jobs. Something happened that for me was a life learning experience. The steward came up, wanted a t-shirt, said, I'm going to wear it in. The chief steward came up, said, I want a t-shirt, I'm going to wear it in. The vice president of the union came in. Now, I'm from the generation that thought everybody over 30 was a sellout. So first I had to dump that, and realize that that wasn't a hard and fast rule. There was room for compromise. But secondly, I realized that in most unions, even if they're controlled at top by sellouts, there are good, honest, decent unionists who will ally with you tactically on certain issues. And these guys, we won. They had to take all the work off our jobs. They had to hire hundreds of people into the factory. And we really beat won on the union principle of not working like dogs and bringing people to work if they want us to work overtime. I'll just say quickly, at that point, the FBI and the company met and decided what to do about me. So they dragged me off the assembly line and dragged me down 4 flights of stairs and threw me out on the street and discharged me. And then it was 2.5 years before I got back, but I did get back and then raised more hell.
What I appreciate what y'all saying was the humility and learning from folk. A lot of times what happens is that people who know the right thing, we know we're right, we're going to tell people what to do. And you're saying that's a stupid thing that we all did. I mean, I got my own true confessions, but I'm too shy for that, okay? But that's a very important lesson by itself, the idea that we don't know everything, and we learn from folk, and that growth comes from the learning thing. I want to have a bit more of an interaction, not simply boom, 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 around your experience in the question of race. There's a lot of talk now about how we got to deal with the anti-racist and so forth, and it rolls one way in the realm of ideas, and it comes another way in the real world itself. So in terms of your experiences as being a radical organizer in the workplace, how did race come up? How did you deal with it? But have kind of interaction. You feel free to quiz someone else and you say something and call bullshit what you want to do amongst friends.
Well,
go ahead.
I would recommend, if you haven't read Fighting Times, John's book, a lot of these war stories are in the book on steroids. It's quite a piece of work and really instructive. But John, I know you really took on those questions head on in the workplace and had some amazing interactions, particularly with white workers and challenging them around racism. And that was some of the most moving stuff in your book, and maybe you could talk a little more about that.
Yeah, if I could talk about 2 examples. One very quickly, when we had a Black student strike in Madison, we had shut down the university with impenetrable picket lines, which meant we didn't let anybody go to class. And the governor brought in the National Guard with bayonets to move us off of the steps. So that night we called for a march on the Capitol in Madison. 10,000 white students marched in support of the Black student strike. So all this nonsense about critical race theory and it's going to hurt people's feelings and whatever, no, it's a question of education. We had set out to educate the students as to why the Black students had a right to ethnic studies, to more admissions, only 500 Black students out of a campus of 30,000 people. So, that's where one of the early experiences. But I'd like to talk a little bit about while I was fired, I went into a steel fabrication plant, and I was put on second shift, and it was all young white rednecks. I mean, all had muscle cars, big wide tires, Trans Ams, etc. And I used to come in and lecture them about racism, and it didn't work. I mean, in fact, the biggest guy, Big Carl, who was like 6'8", hit me so hard I flew across the bar and landed on my wrist and broke it. When we got ready to strike, we formed a caucus of these young guys, and we led the strike. We led a walkout because it was a conservative business union, the steelworkers. They were nowhere to be found. Now, during that strike, the GM repossessed one of the strikers' cars, a guy named Eyebolt, who had a cherry Trans Am with big tires. And everybody was sort of, Melrod, you got us out here on strike. What are you going to do now? Eyebolt lost his car, great job. And so I said to everybody, let's go to the GMAC, the finance company, and picket and go in there and tell them we're taking the keys back. And these were guys who had all been in the juvie system, courts, judges were always in control. And so they were a bit hesitant. I said, no, we got the power to get the car back. So we went out there, and the interesting thing was that 2 carloads of black workers showed up to join us because they were on strike because the meat cutters union was being broken. 8 meat cutter shops in Milwaukee, which was a union town. So these guys are all like, the white guys are like looking over, what are these, what are these guys doing here? And so we march in, 3 of us, we tell the manager we want the keys. He says, you're not going to get the keys. And I said, look, if you don't give us the keys, all those people out there are going to be in this office and we're not leaving until we get the keys. So he gave us the keys to the car back, which was a tremendous victory, obviously, and a morale booster. But the important part of the story is the next week, I got all those same guys to go to the meat cutters picket line of all black workers. And they were stone racist, but they went because they had learned from the experience of the unity that we had to work together. And I was looking back at some of my old picture albums. Those same guys, after I left that plant and went back to the auto plant, they came to every May Day, which was, they had been so anti-communist and so racist. And it was like, in the experience of the concrete conditions, their consciousness developed into more of a class consciousness than just a simple trade union consciousness.
It's powerful. Do you want to feed any of it, examples of good and bad race on the job?
Well, one thing I would say, and this is true of HERE too, the hotels and restaurants. If you work in lower level industries, the racism is always there. And it is not even hidden. So I did my apprenticeship at the Hyatt. It was called the Hyatt on Union Square. And now it's called the Grand Hyatt on Stockton Street. I'm sure y'all. The B word, the N word, the C word, whatever, those were normal every single day, every shift. That's not only the way the managers talk to you, that's the way the workers talk to you. So when a waiter wanted to pick up and you were slow, he would say, and then when you women were addressed the B word. That was the way it was. I used to tell people the only thing worse than the racism in hotels and restaurants is the sexism. And those were back in the day when they could tell you how to wear, what to wear, and all that stuff. And so the question really is that in that context, that this is the environment that we are working in and we are living in the United States of America. What do we do? How do we build unity? How do we build class solidarity? Which is, I think, a big, big freaking problem here. And I feel like that, again, we have to learn from the workers. So one of the things good about being in HERE is that it was not white people, unity with white people was the least of our problems, really, because there weren't that many of them in the industry by the time I got there anyway. But there was an incredible amount of disunity among other people of color, Latinos against Chinese, Filipinos against Chinese, and vice versa, because they also had us segregated by job classification. There was a hierarchy in the kitchens, and they kept it. And the training stuff, that all happens in different, the more skilled you are, the greater the hierarchy. So you have to learn from that, I think, how to build that unity, cross over it. So you teach. If I was a cook, I would tell the Latino dishwasher what I'm doing if he wanted to know, because that's how a lot of immigrants become cooks. They don't go to culinary school, they don't go to city college. They wash dishes and then they make sandwiches and then they get on the hot one. That's the way it's done. So you have to build that solidarity by willing to say, okay, I'll teach you. I'll show you how to do it. And then and be real about it. Be real about it so that they can do it. And I go back to local 2 picket lines now. And guys who used to wash dishes for me when I was cooking, they got my job now, but they're almost retiring too. So that was a long time ago. So they're almost out too. But that's how you have to do it that way. I would just want to tell, I know I'm talking too much, I would tell one funny joke about, it was a true story. So I worked in a restaurant because I got blacklisted for a while in hotels. So I went into this restaurant that we were on strike in '83, and we actually lost that strike, but we kept the restaurant union. So half the guys in the kitchen were on strike, the other half were stabbed. And then I come in, and it's a terrible place. I mean, it was a good restaurant, high class, blah, 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 but it was a terrible place to work, and the chef was a fucking asshole. And so, there was no issues, there was no grievances, there was no breaks, forget that stuff, right? But they also would give us beer every night. And so this is the other thing. That's why I tell people to read Kitchen Confidential. The drugs and the booze, that's our bribe. Alcoholism among cooks is like freaking off the charts, So it's kind of like, so every day when I picked up my meat tray, if I was working the grill, in between the steaks were bottles of beer. If I was working the fish station, same thing. Whatever I was doing, because the butcher was the distributor. He was the guy, right? Well, one day what happened was, I picked up my tray and there's fucking Coors in there. Coors, beer. Those guys old enough to remember Coors, Teamster?
Coors.
80s. They were on strike. There was a boycott. It was like eating grapes from UFW. It was, I couldn't say anything. It was fucking Coors. I didn't say, hey man, we're not supposed to be drinking this shit. No. What I said, I started ranting and raving. I actually ranted and raving right in the middle of the restaurant. I said, this stuff is shit. I wouldn't drink this shit. It tastes like water, tastes like piss. I don't want it, take it out of my fucking tray. And you know what happened? The fucking management caved. They fucking caved. Okay. And then they gave us Beck's and Heineken. So I did in the fucking American beer quota. And overnight, among the scabs, among the strikers, I was a fucking shop floor hero, man. Fucking war and got us fucking Beck's and Heineken. It had nothing to do with anything, honestly. Nothing. I had to just think about it on the fly because I couldn't say, because if I just said, I don't want to drink this shit, somebody said, I'll take it. But they changed the beer quota. I never knew that was an issue, but I guess it was.
I want to break up the flow a second and have you raise questions you have. Let's say this is for you, not for us necessarily. Is there any questions you might have for the panelists on either thing you may have thought of it given what they've said so far, or other thoughts or questions you might have? I don't know who.
You don't want me to do it?
Yes.
Okay.
We talk about you also ignore this dynamic right here.
So I appreciate everything you all said. But one of the things when I came out of the civil rights movement, a black minister told me my role was to educate white people about racism. So how do you see in the unions, et cetera, that in a way that brings them forward, not pushes them away, to educate white people?
If I could take a quick attempt to answer that. We went, our caucus, which was called Fighting Times, like the book, there was a march in Tupelo, Mississippi, called by the United League. And we put out a flyer to the whole plant, 7,000 people. This is Kenosha. I mean, this is where Kyle Rittenberg shot and killed somebody, you know, which could never have happened if the union was still there. But in any event, we called for people to join us in going to Tupelo to march against the Klan. And we put that flyer out at 18 gates to everybody, to the white workers, whatever. And we talked about the role of the Klan and what they had been like. So we go down to the south, down sort of south of the Mason-Dixon line, and our bus pulls up right in front of the Tupelo Police Department, and out come 20 police in white robes and Klan hats and axe handles and pistols, you know. So, and the point was, we get back to work, and after work, I go to the bar. And this guy, I start feeling something in the side of my stomach. I look down, it's a 38. And he says to me, Melrod, you're that Jewish commie. And I'm a member of the White People's National Socialist Party. My name is Deadeye DiMarino. And I go, whoa, this is not good. So I knew I couldn't lecture him because he had the 38. So I called the bartender. I said, bartender, double shots. We did him down. Double shots. We did him down again. Then we started talking. I said, Deadeye, who supported the steward in your maintenance department when he got fired? He said, Fighting Times. And I said, who supported you guys when you were slowing on a slowdown? And he said, Fighting Times. By the time we walked out of there drunk 3 hours later, he was hugging me and embracing me. You're my union brother. You got no more problems with me. We're together on this. So, I mean, it's only because you're working there and you've been there and people have seen you got the guts to fight the company. But the point is, when Hillary Clinton called people a basket of deplorables, that's bullshit. Because almost anybody can be organized if you're there with them in a day-to-day experiences of what we have to fight in common.
You didn't respond to my question.
Well, I thought it was explaining how
Okay,
each.
let's move on. Let me get the other phone.
No. What did you want to hear? Talk a little more.
Well, as I mentioned, how do we educate white people on the race issue, not just through a demonstration or through a rally, but how do we do that? How do unions do that? How do community groups talk to people?
But Juliana, that's why I thought his response was so profound, because the tendency is to think that we're going to go into a classroom or give people historical readings on race in America, rather than it is through that kind of down and dirty social practice that people's minds change.
Okay.
And they change very slowly sometimes.
Okay.
That's our hand here.
I was going to ask if you have any advice for like organizing along language barriers, because I mean this is still totally a thing. Like I used to work in a movie theater, and if you're a woman, you speak Amharic, you're from Ethiopia or Eritrea, you're behind the counter. If you're a guy, you speak English, you're on the floor. It's a Grand Lake Theater in Oakland. It's still that way for the most part. And like that was a definite barrier for like speaking to my coworkers and stuff. I would do both shifts, but like I'd be behind the counter. I'm with, 4 ladies that speak Amharic, and we can chat a little, but like most of the conversation I'm not able to follow. So I guess advice for how you cross those kind of linguistic barriers in the workspace, and how you cross those kind of like when they give you different tasks. We don't share the same break room, we don't have the same conversations all the time. How do you cross those barriers for organizing?
Well, my experience is one of the things that benefited me when I first organized that machine shop. I spoke Italian, and a third of the workforce were Italian immigrants. A third were Puerto Ricans, and a third were folks from South Boston. And I found that if I spoke slowly in Italian to the Puerto Ricans, and they spoke slowly in Spanish to me, that we were able to communicate. And we started publishing our newsletter in all 3 languages. And we built unity through that process. And so I would encourage people to take seriously the issue of language acquisition or finding folks who are the natural leaders in those different groups and working with them. Because God forbid I tried to learn Chinese. I flopped.
Any ideas or responses to the question?
You know, I think in a way it's not. I kind of agree with John in the sense that what we want from white workers is solidarity, not, you know, and there's a lot of the problem I have with some of the other ways of so-called teaching them about racism is it ends up to be a big guilt trip. And that's where I think it fails with the working class. And I think that's why, because Trump is the exact opposite. Like, fuck this shit. We got nothing to feel guilty about, that's also a little bit of bullshit. But I think the solidarity thing is important because it's kind of like the way I see the best white workers are the ones that, especially if the union is in struggle. See, that's the big thing.
Yeah.
If the union is in struggle, which side are the white workers on? Like, to me, you want to build solidarity? People who go on strike together are in solidarity. Scabs, on the other hand, are also in solidarity if you really want to know about it, because you can win over scabs for the next strike, but it's hard because they already won once sometimes. But that's the solidarity. If they're out there over time, that's going to be the solidarity, because the other shit will fall apart. The other shit will fall apart if they start suffering together. But it's hard because we do have segregated workplaces like they're talking about, which I worked in. We do have other issues, so it is very difficult. I think one of the ways to overcome that, and which I think we had it during our generation, which I think is less. We also had a unified. We had organizations. So the way we changed the union was we had people in different hotels. We had people in different departments. We had front of the house, we had back of the house. We had this, we had that. So it wasn't up to us to organize everybody, because we had other comrades doing the same shit, running the same line in the other place. I think it's harder in some ways for this generation because you don't have the leftist infrastructure that we had. Now, some of that was like, hey, democratic centralism, you have to do what you're told. You have to move there, you have to change this job. Some of that we didn't like, but it worked. See, I was perfectly happy to stay a Teamster. You know, I was perfectly happy to stay. I would have had a better pension today if I had stayed in Teamster. Honestly, even back then. You know, so you just have to. We had that kind of organization that you guys don't have.
Yeah, my name's Art Persico. I'm a retired Teamster, and we do have good pensions. I retired at age 53 with a pension. But when I started out, I was living in Stockton, California, and one of my first jobs. I was living in Stockton, California, and one of my first jobs was at Taco Bell, earning minimum wage. Next summer, I worked at the Del Monte Cannery. And when I got hired, they sent me to this office. I had no idea what it was all about. It was the union office. I had no education in high school about unions. So I became a Teamster, and I was doing the spraying job on the, cleaning up the line on the peach canning. And that was, every hour I'd have to go in there for 15 minutes and spray down the line. And I don't remember how it happened, but I wanted to try the sorting of the tomatoes. And this was typically done by women of color. And I had it for about maybe 2 hours or 4 hours, and I couldn't handle it. It was just backbreaking. Standing on a line, all these tomatoes are coming down the line, you have to sort them out. It was just tremendously difficult, at least backbreaking to me, work. but it was all women of color, and it was they had a different scale of pay for each kind of job, and it was the lowest pay. So that was an example of I think racism and sexism that I experienced.
That's a question over there someplace. I see it.
Yeah, I mean, I really, as someone who has tried to like study the older generation of politics and reflect on my experience, I really agree with the comment that was made about sort of the lack of discipline, sort of political organization that exists. And I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to how you think we can rebuild that tradition.
Let me kind of add on to that. The good and the bad of discipline, by the way. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely true that you can amplify the power of cadres when they're all working off the same playbook and working together and acting together and implementing the same political line in practice. The downside is that we extended that kind of discipline to many other facets of life. So we, for instance, would break up romantic relationships when we felt like they weren't serving the struggle of the working class, or we had a terrible view of gay people. You know, there was a lot of problems with some of that discipline and world outlook, but it was certainly true in terms of being able to engage in collective activity in workplaces. For instance, having a team of people that were all on the same page and acting together is a very powerful force.
You know, I don't think I have a formula for you. You know, I wish I did, because it's really a prime question. You know, with all this breaking out around the country at Amazon, at Starbucks, you know, et cetera, you know, how do you pull all that together? The one thing I will say is that I think that the younger people who are here have to really avoid the sectarianism that we fell into, because that was really destructive. And I mean, Warren and I can tell war stories about his organization was on the opposite side of my organization, but then we can't figure out why. We can't remember what was the explanation of why, you know, why Warren shut down our speaker. He did.
I was following orders. It usually happens like that. I was a good soldier. But, you know, yeah, I wouldn't recommend replicating the stuff we were trying to do, because it did lead to a lot of sectarian. And also the personal stuff a lot of it was bullshit. Who cares who you were going out with? You know, who cares, you know, if she's not okay or he's not okay or whatever, with how many meetings you go to, everything is like, loser. That's it. You know, it wasn't nothing, you know, that was kind of, you know, I don't know. Here's the thing. We thought the revolution, somebody else said in the last one, we thought socialism was gonna happen. That's the difference. We thought, now people think, oh, it's never gonna happen. That's bad too. But not only did we think it was gonna happen, we think it was gonna happen within our lifetime. See, that was how fast shit was changing. When Nixon left office, we never thought we were gonna get frickin' Reagan and forget Trump. See, we were off on that kind of stuff. How far the country was going back, see. But on the, you know, so I wouldn't recommend that, you know, you just, you know, but at the same time, I think what we did, which we don't regret, was we have to go into the working class. Right. You don't go into the working class, you leave it to frickin' Trump and the nutcases on Fox News. That's what's happening. You have to go in. Now, here's the difference, though, and this, somebody else said this in the last workshop I was at. He goes, yeah, Warren, but when you guys did it, you could rent an apartment, which is true, in San Francisco for $135 a month. That was my first apartment in San Francisco, by myself, $135. So a teacher, hell yeah, I was living good. 19 years old, you could live by yourself. Can any of you guys do that today? Forget about it. I could buy my first house in San Francisco, mortgage, carried on a cook's salary from Local 2. I was pretty high up by then. I was pretty, high up on the union staff chart. I mean, not staff, but worker chart, skilled. But still, could anybody do that today? No way. So that's the difference. See, now, so I think you guys should go into the working class, but I'm not saying you should all go into Starbucks, although I think that's good. I think you have to go somewhere that you can do that reasonably well and you could live with, because it's going to be the rest of your life. And maybe more. And that you could change whatever union's there. So for example, I'll give an example. I think if this country's ever going to have healthcare reform, it's because of the nurses and the medical workers. If this country is ever going to have better schools, it's going to be because of the teachers. So you'll be changing not only your own working condition, your own union, you'll be changing a service that is given to the working class that is really fucked up right now. You'll be fighting for both things. Better healthcare if you're in the healthcare field, or better schools if you're a teacher. I mean, and even if you're in Amazon, you don't have to be driving the truck. You could be fucking up the orders for Bezos. I mean, I think they pay a little bit better doing that. But I don't really know.
I want to move on, but I want to say one last thing on that point about what we did back in the day, centralization. We're all product of our times, and we try to change the world that we see in front of us, given our views of the past. And for a lot of young folk, our past is not your past. And so the important thing is seeing what today is the kind of the new material to work with, the grits of whatever the term's going to be to work with to change the world, with certain key anchors. Now, how do you actually read yourself in the working class? What does it mean today to do that? Right. And then second, what does it mean to have organization given today's world? And my thoughts are those two anchors, y'all figure shit out basically, right? And I'm a person who had almost every book, memoir, somebody from the 30s, basically, I can tell you the titles, right? But the 30s now, 100 years ago, damn it, almost, right? So the question, not so much what we did around certain things in terms of emulating them, is more finding a couple of good anchors. My thoughts was, again, roots in the working class, and how do you build an organization, and then see where your concrete situation actually might be. But other questions I have for that? Yeah.
Hi there. I have a lot of questions. I'm gonna kind of ask a two-parter, and I'd be happy to get an answer to either one or both, depending on what comes to mind. One is about fighting within unions, frankly. I was chapter president of a housing nonprofit in the Tenderloin. When we were negotiating our contract and building what ultimately became a strike, we often felt like we were fighting on three fronts. The union, in that case SEIU, was trying to put a kibosh on that, was slow walking it for various reasons, and of course management, and then the city. So I'm kind of curious, since you all have experience with unions, if you had fights with union leadership like that and techniques you had to kind of get through those and kind of build that solidarity between the workers and the democratic element and the kind of high up leadership. The second question is a very specific organizing question. I think in these days, especially low wage workers, the turnover is incredibly high. And I do a lot of organizing in nonprofits where that has been, I've seen it cripple campaigns that my friends work on, and I'm on campaigns that are struggling with it. So if you have any techniques from your experience that helped in high turnover workplaces.
And the word is?
Oh. Oh God. Can you just the first question?
The first question was basically about dealing with
Oh,
disagreement.
excuse me. So that's really a key issue, because we had to eventually become the elected officials in the local to really be able to transform the local. And as we did that, for instance, I was put on the education committee, and I then set up a 7 weeks training school. 235 stewards and rank and file activists attended it, and I was able to teach the class. So it was only because we had made it into the structure of the union. At the same time, we always maintained our independence with our caucus. We put our newsletter out, we took up issues, we didn't allow the International ever to tell us what to do. In fact, there was a time when we were on Wildcat and they were on the TV saying the strike's over, and we're all in the bar yelling, no, it's not, we're not going back to work. But it took building a rank and file caucus that could always stay rooted in democracy, in militancy, and in willingness to be critical of the International or the local leadership. I had to deal with both. I mean, when I got fired, it was the union president that said, I've been instructed by the International to tell you there's no way you're going to get his job back. Don't vote to strike for this guy.
On the issue of turnover, you mentioned, which is a huge deal at Amazon. I've been doing a lot of work with Amazon workers around the country, and they estimate turnover to 100 to 150%. What we're going to have to do there, and this goes to the book that I worked on, Labor, Power, and Strategy, we're going to have to figure out within that Amazon work process, where are there particular choke points or strategic workers that we should think about organizing and or becoming. So for instance, there's a huge introduction of robotics into Amazon. Mm-hmm. Who's going to repair those robots? In fact, they have now a company training program in mechatronics, which is robot repair. And we're encouraging young folks who want to make a difference in organizing this behemoth to become robot mechanics and train up and develop some of these skills so that you can hang in there, make a decent living, do some work that's somewhat challenging, and have a strategic position within the work process. The Starbucks example is one where, yes, baristas turn over and potentially are relatively easy to replace. But what about ILWU? What about coffee warehouses on the docks here where, you know, ships are unloading beans and they're being stored in a warehouse and then processed? Can't we figure out a way to organize in those key nodes of that production process? So each one of these industries faces these unique challenges, but that goes back to this issue of concrete analysis of concrete conditions. If I took anything away from my experience in the same organization that John was in, it was this older comrade who would always come to meetings. He was an odd duck. He would be eating animal crackers and he was way overweight and obese. But he'd say, comrades, you must do a fucking concrete analysis of fucking conditions. And I've taken that with me. Forget about Mao Zedong and Lenin and whatever. That phrase is really a key to orientation, both in terms of direct organizing, but also in terms of politics. I mean, what moment are we in this country? You do a fucking concrete analysis of fucking condition, you say, we have a real fascist threat here, and we got to think about how do you build a broad united front to stop it. That's a concrete analysis of concrete conditions.
So we follow Chairman Hamburger crackers to revolution, y'all, I guess.
That's it.
One last thing, what you still think about concrete analysis? In I think almost all of our cases, the unions were more local. And the idea that you have local meaning small to a factory, not a union covered Bay Area, Sacramento, that kind of thing, which changed the dynamics. That's what's important within the concrete analysis compared to what we went through. The last thing is wondering in terms of the turnover is what's the proper form of organization given that? So if people are churning from different cafes or Starbucks, whatever else, just having a one only sole location may be hamstringing that actual organizing. If people are churning between different nonprofits, once again, how do you get people involved beyond just one nonprofit itself? Mm-hmm. Other questions? I thought I saw another hand someplace I didn't see. Yeah.
Well, this is a weird question, but given your experience, and you've all been in unions, private sector unions right now is 6%. Mm-hmm. That's pretty goddamn low. Public sector is like 33.1%. But let's just say the private sector. Now, all of you have been in auto or hotels or various things, including longshore. If you had, like as a thought experiment, if you could steer resources towards a sector, I know Peter has a lot of ideas from his book, but if you could steer resources and militants and people to go in, what sectors would you prioritize? Peter already talked about the coffee thing, but would you say go into, because we don't have hotels, we also have Airbnb. We don't have taxis, we have Uber and Lyft. What future sectors do you think should be prioritized?
Well, I was going to riff off of that into that last question, which I think is still valid, is that I think if you go into a union sector, automatically, if you have any left politics at all, you're going to be.
There was two
fighting.
clauses we removed from the Constitution, which we could. One, we had an anti-red clause. Well, me and another guy, when we got sworn in, we were like this after the Pledge of Allegiance by the Labor Council, because they had an anti-left clause. First meeting, gone. The second one, to me, is even more important. We also used to have a citizenship in Local 2. You could not hold office in a union that was 2/3 immigrants unless you were a citizen of the United States. Isn't that weird? We got rid of that one. To me, that was more important than the anti-red clause. That we got rid of that one in the first meeting too. So that's what being elected by 12, we got 12 slots out of 13 in that election. We totally controlled the board. Boom, we got rid of those two things. And it changed forever. What Local 2 is, what the international is now.
I would just respond specifically to this issue of industries. I saw a brilliant presentation you just did on the United Auto Workers victory. And of course, everyone knows that the union has now announced publicly a massive campaign to organize these foreign transplants that are operating mostly in the southeast of this country. So if people have the chops and the fortitude and want to go to work, these are places where you can work and establish a decent standard of living and participate in a potentially historic moment. Salt the auto industry, salt the southeast. There's more workers non-union than there are in the UAW at this point. You take assembly plus parts. And it's a very exciting moment. I mean, I think 4 or 5 of the auto companies, as you pointed out in your PowerPoint, have already raised wages anywhere between 20 and 11%. So they're clear on what the UAW victory means. And we should be equally clear that we have a huge opportunity to organize that industry. And that's a place for people to go work. I mean, we have friends that went into auto and retired out of auto, or went into electrical or steel or whatever. And I think you can still do that. You can particularly do it if you organize your workplace.
Yeah, Peter's written a lot on this, about the importance of going into and industrialize. I called NUMMI the other day to ask if they were hiring. They're hiring on the assembly line. I mean, I can't imagine a better place to organize where you could Tesla, where you could fuck with Elon Musk every day. I mean, but it's true. 8% are in private sector or belong to union. But there's only 2 industrial powers in the world today, China and the US. So there's still tremendous amount of industry. Peter and I have some people that we've been working with down in the southeast who are in the UAW in the electric bus for school buses. So, I mean, there's a lot of industry, a lot of room for organizing. It's just gonna take people who are willing to make that kind of move.
Copy the Swedes with Tesla.
Yeah.
Last 2 questions here.
Yeah, thanks so much. This is really, really interesting. I wanted to just ask a question that's a little different. Like in a lot of the war stories you guys brought up, which I love, there's a lot of like the place that it's happening in isn't the shop floor, it's a bar, it's a pool hall. It's like people are like engaging in like working or are part of working class culture. And I feel like another problem that like me and other people run into today is like because of the gentrification and all this stuff, people are living in like totally different places, and like there aren't as many of the pool hall situations and stuff like this. I'm just wondering if you could reflect on like what you think the importance of working class culture is like outside of the workplace as well. Do you think that's decisive? Do we need to think about that? Or do you think it's just like incidental and really not as important? Just kind of curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I've been working on that with some people. They called me from the Denver Art Museum, and they wanted to organize a union. And they actually, their whole organizing committee bought the copies of Fighting Times as a basis to figure things out. But what we figured out is, you're right, people are dispersed. It's not like back in Wisconsin where everybody went to the bar. You know, that doesn't exist any longer. But what we did is we decided to start having social events. So they had a Halloween party. Company didn't know it was by the union organizing committee, but it was. So I think, you know, then they're talking about doing potlucks, doing them at work. So I think there has to be creativity to create a social unity among people, you know, who are in the union. And we just got to be creative, because it's not as easy as it was for us.
It is important to acknowledge, however, that culture plays a huge role in this still. And the 49ers won 42-19 today.
Excellent.
No, but seriously, I mean, a lot of my work with immigrant workers was based in football leagues, FUTBOL, soccer leagues. And the whole networks of workers with company teams was crucial to leading the workers and organizing the workers. I'll tell you a funny quick story. So in 1990, we went out to a soccer field one day. We knew there were a bunch of workers at a metal fabrication shop playing a game there, and we had a parrilla. We would bring a grill with us, and we'd grill up a carne asada. And these folks came over, and we started talking, and we said, "You want a union?" They said, "Yeah, we want a union." "How do we get a union?" I said, "Well, there's two ways to get a union. One is you can have an election and go through this long, often drawn-out legal process, or you can strike for the union." And this was on a Saturday. They said, "We'll strike." And I was like, "Holy shit!" But they said, "No, Monday morning we're striking." So we show up. My buddy and I, we show up at 5 a.m. at this company called Royal Truck. You see their trucks all over the state. And these guys are there, and we start picketing. It's all Mexican guys. And we're strong, and no scabs are going in. And then I had to leave, because this is before cell phones, so I had to go back to the office to find out what was happening. And I come back to the picket line, and everyone's gone. And I talked to my buddy. I says, "What happened?" He says, "Oh, this is the first day of the World Cup, and Mexico's playing. Everyone's at a bar. And in fact, maybe they were motivated to strike by that cultural question." So if you're not rooted deeply in understanding those issues, you're going to fuck it up. And of course, we ended up in a 12-week strike, and it's a long story. But that's an example of culture playing a crucial role. And if you don't know who you're organizing and what's going on in their world, you're in big trouble.
I'd like to, this is an observation. I wonder if you could respond. I think the whole picture here is, because I know a couple of these folks, I did some of that. I'm Bill Shields. I used to work here at the Labor and Community Studies Department at City College. And I did some of that blue collar work, but I didn't go in like they did as part of a cadre group or becoming part of a cadre group. I got into teaching pretty early. But after 10 years or so, I'm now the union president because I fought to change the union. I decided now I want to write a book about that experience. I think I want to go become a labor educator and teach about it. So to the extent that I or any of us have anything to say about it to the young folks here, I would say maybe it's being a little contrary. Yeah, we need people to sacrifice and go into the auto plant in Tennessee, but also give yourselves a break, you know. Find what's joyful for you, what's going to sustain you. Think of a long career as having multiple parts to it. Because the last thing we need is burnt out, bitter people who like really wanted to be a teacher, but I've been in the goddamn factory for 30 years because somebody told me I should, you know. So I would say, in addition to finding what's important to do and where you're needed, to also give yourself permission to think about various stages of your career, different things you might be doing. Because I think if you're going to be a labor educator, if you spent 10 years in that factory, you're going to be a really good labor educator. And when Warren worked with us in the Labor and Community Studies Department, he brought all that experience as a cook into the classroom to teach. So to Peter, that I don't know the other brother, but and Stephen, who's nationally known, and all these guys are nationally known, wonderfully respected labor educators. So just that's a little thought. I wonder what you would think about that multi-phase career advice to young people.
That and also last words, because we're gonna shut things down. So both respond to Bill and closing thoughts.
Well, I would say you should go where you want to go, because I ended up with pancreatic cancer in 2004 from working with trichloroethylene. I mean, they directly linked it to the trichloroethylene. So, you know, I mean, they only gave me 6 months to a year to live, but I'm still here. I fought it. But I think it's right. You gotta go where you want to go, you know, and you're not going to be a good organizer if you go into work down at Tesla and you don't want to be on an assembly line, because it's hell, you know. So I agree with you. I really wish a lot more people like yourself or like Warren would write books about their experiences, because I've traveled around the country doing book tours, and people are really interested in what our experiences were. So I'll say the last words would be, Peter has his book over here. I have my book over there. Warren has an article he wrote that's over there for free, and the books are both only $15. We discounted them for this event. So anyone who wants can stop before they leave.
Warren?
Yeah. Well, I kind of agree. You got to do what you feel you could do that's okay for your soul. And even for me, I got into cooking because actually my first job was as a busser. And because I speak English, obviously, I was supposed to become a waiter. They would never fucking promote me because I didn't have the right attitude. Wow, what a shock. But I had the right attitude to be a cook because I knew those guys, they're crazy. And I saw how they work. You have to work your ass off, but I could do it. And I liked it actually, because, you know, I wrote in the article, there's another thing. If you have a skill that you're good at and you're good enough, I told one of the owners to go fuck himself. Then he offered me a promotion after he knew that I was better than the fucking chef who I was filling in for. You know, and it's kind of like, but you have to be able to do it. And you have to be able to do it in such a way that it's real. You want to do it. You know, and I didn't have a problem cooking. On the cultural stuff, well, with HRE, there's still a lot of bar hopping. That's what nobody goes home after work. That's just the way our industry is. It's a bad thing, honestly. But that's still there. But the other thing about the cultural stuff is there's different pockets of socializing. And you can't do it all. Let's be real. You know, and again, we grew up in the environment. We live in this country, the United States we are all segregated in many respects. So that was the other thing. You can't do but you got to do your part. That's what it is, and bring the groups together. That's what we really did. We organized our own groups, but we brought them together when it mattered.
Yeah, going where you're comfortable and making a good life. I generally agree with that. There's a very good new book out on tech worker organizing by a guy named Ethan Marcotte, and I highly recommend that book because he makes the case for tech workers who are often, you know, making $250,000 out of college, but have issues and need to be organized. So your point is well taken. However, there are some industries where I mentioned this issue of skilling up, particularly the building trades in this country, construction work.
Yeah.
My son's a college graduate in philosophy, but he's a union electrician, and he's making a great living, and he's got flexibility to do what he wants to do. He's living in Japan right now. But that's a sector of the economy that, while there is modular production and there are challenges, it's not going to be exported. So that's an area where we need to build union power, and it's an area traditionally with a lot of money and resources and a lot of conservative unions. So we need to change those unions, and they are changing. The influx of immigrants has moved those unions a long way, particularly the carpenters and laborers. So those are opportunities for jobs that are good paying, that are challenging, and yet a place where we can build power for the working class. So yes, play it as it lays, go where you feel comfortable, but challenge yourself a little bit to think about strategic sectors of the economy. I mean, I am overjoyed to see the way the auto workers rock this country.
Yeah.
I mean, let's not forget that there are strategic sectors in
That's
this
right.
economy
And the Teamsters.
where,
too.
and the Teamsters struggle too, where workers' power is a huge deal. And to watch the heads of those auto companies basically crying and moaning. Mary Barra says, but I make my money based on performance. You know, I mean, crying and whining that when we challenge them around your salary versus a line worker. It was a beautiful thing. I've never seen anything like it in my life. What a brilliant strategy. We could have talked the whole workshop about that strategy.
And both of those unions changed a lot too. Don't kid yourself. From our day to today, those unions are different unions. It took a long time. A lot of people sacrificed, but they're different now.
So people, it's been good. I'm glad you came. Glad we had the conversation.
Thank you,
And,
Stephen.
Go forth and keep it on.